Well, as you can see from this image, the Louvre is enormous. It can claim to be the world's greatest museum, both in terms of size, sheer floor space, and the quantity and quality of its collections, and the sheer number of people who visit it every year. So it's estimated there are around 500,000 objects in the Louvre collection, of which 35,000 will be on show at any one time. And last year, I think it was around 9 million visitors, and that figure goes up every year. So it can be a very bewildering experience. Just getting into it is quite intimidating, and finding your way around it and the enormous crowds. So I'm going to give you a very personal view of the Louvre today, what I look at when I go there by myself or with groups, give you some idea of the variety of the collections so that when you go, you can have an idea of what you want to see. You can't see everything by any means. Getting into it for a start, I mean, the main entrance is the pyramid entrance. You can see there in the middle. If you look to the left, that's the Rue de Rivoli, and you can see access via the carousel. And that is often an easier way to get in. The queues are not so long. And also, if it happens to be raining, at least it's covered while you're waiting to go in. So this is the pyramid. This was completed in 1989 in time for the bicentenary of the French Revolution, which broke out in 1789. And it's also, there was the centenary of the Eiffel Tower, which was 1889. And it's by the American Chinese architect I.M. Pei. And you can imagine it was very, very controversial. Some people were absolutely outraged by this modernist, futuristic structure in the middle of a Renaissance and Baroque palace. I have to say it works well. It's certainly very functional. Some people say, oh, looks a bit like an airport. It does, I suppose, but I think it's beautiful in its way. As I said, there can be queues with thousands of people, but it does process them very quickly. You'll find that the queues move into the museum very quickly. So you can see this is a plaque commemorating the opening of the museum in 1793. The core of the collection were the old royal collections, French royal family. Of course, the monarchy was abolished and King Louis XVI was beheaded in 1792, the year that the museum was founded. And they introduced a new date system in that year. So they started off, instead of from Jesus Christ, from the birth of the French Republic. So it was founded in the year 1. The museum, of course, owns some of the most famous, iconic objects in the world. This is the Venus de Milo, discovered on a Greek island, the island of Melos, in 1820, and one of the most admired objects in the Louvre ever since. And it's not widely known, I think, that the Louvre also owns fragments of the Parthenon frieze. The bulk of it, of course, is in London and known by the British as the Elgin marbles in the British Museum. And always a big controversy, should these go back to Greece? Does the British Museum have a right to keep them? And a few years ago, the French culture minister, Jacques Lang, he weighed into this discussion, saying, yes, the British Museum should send back their Parthenon marbles. Didn't say anything about the Louvre ones and about sending those back. And so there is a collection of, an important collection of art of the ancient world, including a representative collection of these Fayum mummy portraits. They're the only paintings on panel that survive from the ancient world, and they date from the 1st century BC to the 2nd century AD. and the Metropolitan New York, British Museum, and the Louvre have the most important collection. These are so amazing, really. They were part of coffins that contained the mummies, and clearly they're portraits of individual people. It's rather amazing to be staring into the face of somebody who died 2,000 years ago, painted in the technique of encaustic, that's colored waxes. There are also important collections of decorative arts, golden age of French furniture making, 17th, 18th century. I don't usually stop to look at these when I go to the Louvre because there are other places that you can see them in Paris, like the Musée Jacques-André, Musée Cognac-G, where it's maybe nicer, or Carnavalet, the Museum of the City of Paris, to see this kind of furniture in context. There is also the world's finest collection of Islamic art. This is the display is quite recent, very, very spectacular. When I'm guiding, I don't usually take people in there because I don't really have the expertise. But if you're interested in this, it's something not to be missed. And these are also iconic, famous objects. These dying slaves of Michelangelo. There are only 4 marble sculptures by Michelangelo to be seen out of Italy. There's the Tondo in London, the Royal Academy, there's the Bruges Madonna, and these 2 sculptures, unfinished, that were made by Michelangelo for what was to have been a vast tomb for Pope Julius II in the early 16th century, but then Michelangelo got distracted by painting the Sistine Chapel, and the tomb was never completed in its originally envisaged form. Now, there's 3 main pavilions of the Louvre. There's Richelieu, which is on the north side of the museum. There's Sully in the middle of the museum, and there's Denon. Denon is, if you're going for a highlights tour of the Louvre, you're most likely to go in through the pavilion of Denon. This is one of the famous views of the Louvre. It's the Winged Victory of Samothrace. This is an ancient sculpture from the Hellenistic period, the late classical period, and it's immensely impressive. Standing at the top of this staircase, here's a closer view of it, with this wonderful rendition of the drapery blowing in the wind and clinging to the body underneath it. Once you get to the top of that staircase, it's worth having a glance into the Salon d'Apollon, the salon of the god Apollo. This dates from the late 17th century. It was commissioned by Louis XIV, the Sun King. And the architecture and the decoration were by the same team that rebuilt Versailles for him. That's the architect Levaux and the painter decorator Lebrun. But there are also, in the middle, there is a big ceiling painting by Delacroix. And this room contains what is left of the French crown jewels. Sadly, of course, most of the crown jewels were broken up, melted down, destroyed in the Revolution. In London, of course, we have a rather more important collection of crown jewels in the Tower of London, but also dating only from after the Cromwell period. If you want to see really, really great crown jewels, of course, you have to go to Vienna to see the Habsburg crown jewels. However, there is this crown. This is the only French royal crown that survives from before the French Revolution. This was a crown made for Louis XV, and we can also see the box that was made to protect it. Something definitely not to be missed is the medieval Louvre. And this was only discovered, people didn't even know it still existed, when they excavated for the pyramid entrance to the Louvre. They discovered that the medieval Louvre, up to maybe a quarter of its original height, was perfectly preserved intact underneath the palace of the 16th and the 17th century. I suppose in many cities, it's the same with ancient Rome, over the centuries, the ground level rises, all the rubbish and detritus and so on. So it was just buried. It dates back to the 12th century, the end of the 12th century, and it was medieval King Philip II in 1190. He initiated this fortress rather than the palace. It's really an extraordinary sensation to go underground. It's almost like some kind of science fiction fantasy. And to find it, because it's been buried for hundreds of years, so there's no erosion, no pollution, it's absolutely perfectly preserved. And when you see these hearts here, these are the masons' marks left when they constructed the building around 1200. Now we go upstairs again, and we go towards the Grand Gallery of the Louvre. We go down this corridor. On the wall, you see frescoes of Botticelli that have been brought from Italy. As you walk through this, it's worth turning your eyes upward into the ceiling, because the Louvre is a conglomeration of different palaces from the Middle Ages, and it's the Renaissance period, and the large parts were made for Louis XIV, and then Napoleon I, the great Napoleon, and completed in the reign of Napoleon III, Louis Napoleon. So this corridor dates from the Napoleonic period, the first Napoleon, and is decorated by his chief decorators, Percier-Fontaine, and it's amazing, virtuosic piece of decoration. You look up into that and you really can't, you need to look up with a pair of opera glasses or binoculars into the ceiling. And it's impossible to tell, really, with the naked eye, what is 3D and what is trompe l'oeil, illusionistic 2D painting. In fact, what looks like copper reliefs is actually just painted onto the ceiling. So we walk through that and we arrive in the Renaissance collection, the Italian Renaissance collection. And this is certainly one of the greatest collections of Italian Renaissance art in the world, possibly rivaled by the National Gallery in London, at least for the earlier part of the period, but unrivaled for the High Renaissance. So we start off with this large altarpiece by Fra Angelico that was commissioned in the 1530s for a convent in Fiesole, and it depicts the coronation of the Virgin. So this is early Renaissance, just the period where they discovered the device of mathematical perspective for giving you an impression of 3D. So if you look at the floor, you can see they love these floors in the early Renaissance that look like chessboards, and that enables you to get a sense of you could actually move into this space. And you can see there's a real sense of volume to the bodies, the figures who are turned towards the Virgin and away from the viewer, and the foreshortening of the legs underneath the material of the cloak. These wonderful, bright, fresh, sweetie colors. This is painted in the technique of tempera. So the medium is egg, and the egg painting tempera keeps its fresh color rather better than oil painting does, which tends to darken with age. So this is a very big piece that was looted by Napoleon. When Napoleon conquered Italy in the 1790s, the French stole everything they could move, really. During Napoleon's reign up to 1814, so half the great masterpieces of the Uffizi and Italian churches and monasteries, they were in Paris, they were in the Louvre. Amazingly, when Napoleon was initially defeated, the French were allowed to keep it all. There'd be hardly anything left to see in Italy if that had continued. But then, of course, Napoleon made his comeback, coming back from Elba, and he had to be defeated a second time at Waterloo. And then at the international conference in Vienna afterwards, they said, no. Those wicked French, they've got give back what they stole, but they didn't give back everything. Hundreds of things did go back, but up to 70 masterpieces that had been stolen from Italy remain in the Louvre. And this is one of them. And in most cases, it was because they were too big and too fragile to be moved a second time. This is a gentleman that I always like to pay my respects to. Well, you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him, would you? I'm not sure you'd want to buy a used car from him either. He looks like an extra from a film about the mafia. This is by an artist called Antonello da Messina, Tony from Messina in Sicily. And he was the artist who is credited with introducing the technique of oil painting into Italy. And oil painting was an invention of the Netherlands. And oil as a medium has two great advantages. One is that it's slow drying, so you can work much more slowly. And secondly, if you want it to be, it can be transparent, so you can build up layer upon layer, getting very subtle gradations of tone and color and increased realism. So this is a guy, he's incredibly real looking, disturbingly real. So he is at the beginning of the Grand Gallery. This is constructed around 1600 for the King Henry IV, Henry of Navarre. He's actually my favorite French king, a likable character. The French call him the king of the chicken in the pot because he said that was his ideal as a king, that every French family should have a chicken in the pot. And I think that's a rather good ideal for a king or a ruler to have. It's still pretty long, but when it was first built, it was 1,500 feet long. A bit was lopped off it later on in the Napoleonic period. And this houses the main part of the Italian Renaissance collection. I'll just point out a few highlights. This is Mantegna, painted around 1500, and it was a commission from Isabella d'Este, the Duchess of Mantua. And she had what she called her studiolo, a little private studio, which was decorated with large-scale mythological subjects. She dictated the subjects in great detail to a group of artists, of whom the most distinguished was Andrea Mantegna. And this is a very fascinating, very strange painting that shows Minerva on the left-hand side with a shield and a spear. And she is driving the vices out of the garden of virtue. Now, the Mona Lisa used to be in the Grand Gallery. At the moment, she's in a side room off the Grand Gallery. It's like this every day. She is mobbed every day of her life. And you have to really fight your way to the front, and she's behind bulletproof glass and very difficult to see. She's also very dirty. The Louvre have quite a conservative policy for cleaning their pictures compared with some other museums like the National Gallery in London. And she is under many, many layers of dirty brown varnish. If they ever get the courage to clean her, it's going to be a revelation. It will be a very, very different picture. There are descriptions of her from the 16th century that say that she had rosy cheeks. Well, she certainly doesn't have rosy cheeks to the naked eye these days. They've just announced, French government have announced plans to display Mona Lisa separate from the main museum and differently, so that mobs and mobs of tourists can go and pay their respects to her. At the moment, what's very frustrating is the wonderful paintings in that room around her, wonderful Titians, Veronese, and so on, that are really difficult to see because of the mobs in front of the Mona Lisa. Here we get a little bit closer to her. If you are frustrated by not being able to get close to the Mona Lisa, go back into the Grand Gallery, and there you find the greatest collection of Leonardo's oil paintings. He didn't paint very many, only just over a dozen, and there are 5 of them in the Louvre. So you can see the Madonna of the Rocks. There are 2 versions of this painting. The one in the Louvre, one in London. And the Louvre version is usually considered to be the first of the two versions and the superior of the two versions. It's also very dirty under layers of dark varnish. You can just detect, I think even in this image, that there are some quite strong colors, yellow, green, red, that will be revealed if they ever get around to cleaning it. The only painting in the Louvre by Leonardo that they have cleaned is the unfinished painting of the Virgin with her mother, St. Anne, that you see on the right-hand side. Again, it was very, very controversial when it was cleaned. Some people, it's always a dangerous thing to take off layers of dirty varnish because you could land up taking off some of the original paint from underneath as well. And it certainly it was an extraordinary transformation when it was cleaned. Another world-famous painting is this one called the Concert Champêtre, and it's Venetian, and it dates from around 1510. But who painted it? Until quite recently, it was attributed to the short-lived Giorgione. Only a handful of masterpieces by him survive. And I remember, oh, it must be 20 years ago, taking a group to look at this painting and saying, let's go and see the Giorgione, and arriving and finding, to my embarrassment, that it was no longer by Giorgione, it's now by Le Titian. And who knows whether that judgment is final or not. Or it could be by both of them, actually, because it's known that Titian took over certain unfinished paintings by Giorgione when Giorgione died and finished them off. In any case, it's a very beautiful painting. And it's been hanging in the Louvre for a very long time, and it's had an enormous influence on later painters. Think, Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe was directly inspired by this painting. A very mysterious painting. The other mystery is not just that we don't really know for sure who painted it, is what on earth is going on in this picture. We have two dressed men and two naked women, and the men are making music, which is in old master painting is always associated with love. So there's love in the air, but who's loving who in this painting? And it seems curious that the two men are much more interested in one another, apparently, than they are in the two naked women either side of them. This is, I think, the biggest painting in the Louvre, certainly amongst the old masters. This is the wedding feast at Cana by the Venetian artist of the mid to late 16th century, Paolo Veronese. It shows the Christ turning up at this wedding feast, and of course performing this miracle of transforming the water into wine. A very useful trick to have up one's sleeve if you're invited to a party. And it's some party, again, there's music and jollification and all sorts of things going on, and obviously wonderful food and a lot of wine being consumed. Now, another painting of this type by Veronese actually got him into trouble with the Inquisition. They said, no, none of this is in the Bible. You're making all of this up. Veronese, we have a record of what was said at the trial. He claimed artistic license, that I'm an artist and I'll do what I like, which was a pretty daring thing to say to the Inquisition. Anyway, he got away with it. He didn't land up in a dungeon. But it's a painting, it's full of color, gorgeous, it's these sumptuous materials. And because Venice itself was famous for centuries for giving the best parties. It's where, if you wanted to have a good time, that was where you went. And it's worth standing in front of this painting and looking at all the details. I'm sure that Veronese was a dog person. I think he really loved dogs, because in all his paintings, you always find dogs, and they're very doggy dogs, aren't they? They're really dogs that behave like dogs. Moving on to the Baroque period, and really we're passing so many masterpieces at a considerable speed, I'm afraid, in this lecture. So I'm just picking out some of the things that you might want to dawdle and look at a bit longer. This is another huge painting by Caravaggio, one of his greatest masterpieces, The Death of the Virgin. And it was commissioned by a church in Rome in 1606. But when it was installed, it caused a scandal. People were shocked by the realism, the bloated, inelegant, the bloated body, inelegant pose of the Virgin. It was even rumored that that Caravaggio had used the body of a drowned prostitute for his image of the Virgin. So it was rejected by the church that commissioned it. Rubens, great Flemish artist, we'll meet later. He was in Rome at the time, and he was in the employment of the Duke of Mantua, and he wrote a letter that survives saying that he thought this was a masterpiece, and he thought it would be a good idea for the Duke of Mantua to buy it. He did so. It was in the Mantua collection, and then when Charles I of England bought the entire Mantua collection in 1626, this painting went with it to England, and it really should be in the collection of our good King Charles. But Cromwell, of course, dispersed the royal collection, and so that's why it landed up in the Louvre, in the French royal collection. Parallel to the Grand Gallery is another very long gallery. Actually, it's in two parts. And it contains what the French called the grande machine, the big machines. And these are huge paintings by French artists that were exhibited at the Salon. This was an annual exhibition that took place every year in Paris in May and June. And all these paintings date from between 1780 and 1848. Now, this was a very, very turbulent era in French history. You've got multiple revolutions. There is the Great Revolution starting in 1789, which itself consisted of multiple revolutions. And then you have Napoleon, and then the fall of Napoleon, and then the 1830 revolution and the 1848 revolution. One about the fascinating things about these two galleries is the way these paintings reflect historical events. So you really can do a wonderful history lesson, history of France in this period. First great masterpiece is a painting called The Oath of the Horatii, and this is by Jacques-Louis David, who became very directly involved in the events of the Revolution and the Napoleonic era. But this is before all of that. We're still in the period known as the Ancien Regime, the old regime before the Revolution. But you look at this painting and you think, something's in the wind, something is coming. This is a very harsh, very severe painting. It's not a painting that we would associate with the ethos of the self-indulgent, pleasure-loving Ancien Regime. Let me just do this little comparison with a painting that I always use to represent the Ancien Regime. It's not actually in the Louvre, it's in the Wallace collection in London. It's by Fragonard, and it shows an aristocratic gentleman with his mistress, and he's looking up her skirts ecstatically as she is flying through the air on a swing. And so a very naughty picture, delightful, frothy, self-indulgent, a different world. It's a totally different world. And it's amazing to think there is actually only 16 years between these two pictures. The Fragonard dates from 1768, and the David was actually painted in Rome in 1784 and sent back to Paris, exhibited at the Salon of 1785. So what does it show? It's a story from ancient Roman history with a moral to it. And the moral is your higher duty to your family and your country over any kind of personal issues. So there was a feud going on between two ancient Roman tribes, the Horatii and the Curatii. They decide to fight this out in a very rational way, where each side would appoint 3 heroes, and the 6 of them would fight it out, and the last man standing would win the war. So what we see here is the 3 Horatii brothers, the oldest one, Horace, in the foreground, swearing an oath of duty to their family and their tribe. But what is very striking about this picture, and in some ways it seems quite actual, shall we say, considering all the culture wars we're having at the moment, particularly around the issues of gender. Because in this painting, we have very clear zoning of the genders. Have the heroic men with their rigid poses, their slightly fascistic arm gesture. They're all very determined, very manly men, and so on. And on the right-hand side, we have the female zone where the women are just floppy and soppy. And that's because they are, they're sisters-in-law, actually. Camilla, who's the one in white, and Sabina, who's the one in blue and mustard cloak. And Camilla is engaged to one of the Horatii, and Sabina is the sister of the Horatii, but married to one of the Horatii. So they're in a no-win situation. Either a brother is going to get killed, or a husband or a fiancé is going to get killed. The survivor is Horace. He comes back. He's the only one of the 6 young men who survives. He comes back and he finds his sister crying and mourning her dead husband. So he kills her, because that's what you do, because she's letting the side down by being so female and so soppy. Another painting by David, not to be missed. This is Madame Récamier. She was a famous beauty of the Napoleonic period, who had a salon, and she was particularly famous for the exquisite beauty of her toes. So there are 2 celebrated portraits of her. The other one is by Baron Gérard, and it's in the Carnavalet Museum. So you can see both if you come to Paris. And in both of them, she's exposing her bare toes. This one is unfinished. She really annoyed Jacques-Louis David, partly because she was habitually unpunctual, and you really couldn't stand that. She didn't turn up on time for her sittings. And the other was, he was really furious when he discovered that she commissioned another portrait simultaneously. Another painting I'm sure you all know, because it's, again, in the true meaning of the word, I think it's become iconic, because this is a painting which is constantly used by political cartoonists to represent the state of the world. Actually, this could be humanity, all of humanity, on this raft in the face of the political chaos that's going on at the moment, or climate change. You could use it for all sorts of reasons, but it actually tells a true story. This is by Théodore Géricault, and it was exhibited in the Salon of 1819. And like so many of these pictures, it was not only telling a true story, it had a clear political agenda to all the people who saw it in 1819. Now, when Napoleon was overthrown and the old Bourbon regime, royal regime, came back, Louis XVIII, there were all these French aristocrats who'd been hanging around for the 20 years since the revolution, who expected to be rewarded, and they were rewarded. And they were made ministers, government ministers, they were made generals, they were put in positions of great importance, and they were incompetent. And so there was a naval expedition to a French colony in West Africa, and there was a convoy of ships and with settlers going to Senegal, and the warship escorting the convoy was captained by an incompetent, inexperienced aristocratic captain, who not only lost the convoy, he managed to wreck his ship on a sandbank in the Atlantic. The ship was breaking up. So he got the ship's carpenter to construct a raft out of timbers from the ship. He and the other aristocrats got into the only little lifeboat that they had, and they rowed into the not very distant African coastline, leaving 149 men and one woman on this raft to their fate in the Atlantic. And it's a truly horrendous story that involves fighting, murder, cannibalism, all sorts of ghastly things. And in the end, just a handful of them survived to the end and were rescued. And I think it's less than a dozen actually survived the experience. Of course, it was a huge scandal and very politicized. So Géricault, painting this picture, was being quite provocative, really, to the government of the day. Another painting that looks like a shipwreck, definitely inspired by the Géricault. This is the debut painting of Delacroix, the Bark of Dante. This was in the Salon of 1822. And I show you this actually for one particular detail. These two figures in the water in front of the Bark of Dante. You can see two things here. One is you can see a kind of cracking and deterioration of the paint surface. That is due to bitumen, a tarry substance that was mixed with the paint and used in the late 18th, early 19th century, just in that period. But after a few years, it discolors and it cracks. And so artists stopped using it really in the mid-19th century. So you can always actually, if you see that on a painting, you can always date it. The other more interesting detail are the drops of water on the figure. Here we are. Left, that's Delacroix, where he has just laid side by side 4 touches of color: red, yellow, blue, and a little blob of white. And you can get up close and all you can see are these 4 touches. When you walk away a little bit, you get this amazing illusion of a glistening drop of water. So that's Delacroix on the left, and he took this idea from a detail of a painting by Rubens that I'll come to in a few minutes. You can see top right. This painting, I'm afraid my image doesn't do it justice, especially since it's been recently cleaned, and it is glowing with the most amazing, amazing color. This is the ultimate French romantic painting with a capital R. And it's inspired by a poem by Byron called The Death of Sardanapalus, about an Oriental potentate who's been defeated and about to fall from power, and decides to go out literally with a bang, having all his concubines and his favorite horses slaughtered in front of him. But it's a very spectacular painting, full of drama and movement, and as I said, much more colorful than the image you can actually see on your screens. So Delacroix, Ingres, they're always paired together, but they were, I wouldn't even describe them as frenemies. No, they were enemies. They were true enemies. They actually detested one another. They're contemporaries, although Ingres, who painted these 2 portraits, is the older of the 2. And they came up with some pretty salty insults for one another. Delacroix said about Ingres, his art is the complete expression of an incomplete intelligence. Wow, but that's some put down. Ingres was equally vitriolic about Delacroix. But they were seen for half a century. They were the polarities of French art. Ingres represented drawing, line, what the Italians call disegno. Delacroix represented color and movement, colore in the Italian parlance. So these are 2 of the earliest masterpieces of Ingres, painted in 1805, of a married couple, Monsieur and Madame Rivière. You can see the linearity, the very strong, clear, bounding contours. The followers of Delacroix used to say about Ingres, he paints en gris, in grey, he can't do color. That's nonsense. As you can see from these paintings, the color is absolutely gorgeous. He really knows how to make color sing. That lovely blue of the velvet cushions. Now, these two paintings between them contain a secret that Ingres guarded through much of his life. He confessed that when he was just 11 years old, on the brink of puberty, he fell obsessively in love with an image of the Virgin Mary, really obsessively, unhealthily. The Madonna of the Chair of Raphael. He didn't actually see the original. He saw a print after it, but it became his erotic fantasy really for the rest of his life. And there are his two most famous nudes. They're both in the Louvre, Grand Odalisque and the Baigneuses de Valpinçon. And it's very clear from the headdress that they are both fantasies, his fantasies of the Virgin of the Chair with no clothes on. Oh, and so the clues, yes, that he puts into the paintings. Can you see next to the sleeve of Monsieur Rivière, there is an engraving after the Raphael Madonna. And the most striking feature of the Raphael Madonna is the way all the lines in the picture are circular, again and again, echoing the circular shape of the frame. And in Madame Rivière, of course, she's in an ovoid frame. And again, if you look in the picture, it's almost like a fugue, a musical fugue, that every line in that picture, whether it's her hand, her shoulder, her hips, her shawl, they're all echoing the ovoid line of the frame. Anyway, to go back to, this is probably his most famous nude. It's called the Grand Odalisque. And again, I would like to really disagree with anybody who says he can't do color. This had the peacock blue and the mustard yellow. They're singing a duet together. They really enhance one another. Now, this was commissioned, strangely, by the Queen of Naples. She was very briefly the Queen of Naples, appointed by Napoleon. She was called Caroline Murat, and she was the wife of a Napoleonic General Murat, who was briefly King of Naples. And she commissioned it from Ingres as a birthday present for her husband. A bit like, a wife today giving a Pirelli calendar to her husband as a birthday present. Anyway, she never got it, he never got it, because Napoleon fell and the rule of Naples was over and done with. But so Ingres exhibited this at the Salon of 1814. And the rumor went round that the Queen of Naples had actually got her kit off to pose for this picture. And Ingres was very indignant. He said, no, not at all. It was a 13-year-old girl in Rome who posed for the picture. Well, I'm not sure about that either, really. Did he really need anybody to pose for this picture? And certainly she doesn't have the anatomy of a 13-year-old girl. She actually doesn't have the anatomy of any woman who ever walked the globe. At the time, a doctor protested that she had too many vertebrae in her back, but I would say that's the least of her anatomical problems. I mean, is her leg actually attached to her body at all? And does she have any bones? And she looks like you could sort of stretch her in any direction, like a blow-up rubber doll. But she's a marvelous picture, wonderfully mysterious and sinuous and seductive. Now, we go up to the top of the building. This is a tip that I offer you. In the Grand Gallery, in those areas where all the tourists go, you'll be absolutely mobbed. And it's very difficult, really, to enjoy the pictures. So often, if I have small groups, I'll take them to the top floor of the building to see the French paintings of small format. The problem is how to get to it. You can go up a series of escalators in the Richelieu Pavilion to the top, but then you have to walk around the whole building to get to rooms I'm talking about. Only one lift, and that is in the Sully Pavilion. You go into the main entrance, go to the toilets, and there's a small lift behind the toilets. It's like a secret. Not many people know it. And you get up to the top. The only slight disadvantage is that the rooms I'm talking about, you'll get to the end of them. So you actually, if you walk through them, you're doing them backwards chronologically. You start off, the Louvre covers the period only up to 1848. So we start off with the artist Camille Corot. And before I show you the next slide, I wonder if you can guess what Corot has been thinking of when he posed this young girl for this picture. Of course, it's the Mona Lisa. Because certainly since the 18th century, the Louvre has been the world's greatest collection of painting, and generations of artists have gone to the Louvre to study the works there and have learned from them. So the famous old masters in the Louvre, you find echoes of them in many later works. This is a more characteristic painting by Corot, painted in the 1820s on a trip to Italy. He's one of those artists like Constable in England who pioneered the practice of painting in oils directly from nature, painting en plein air, in the open air. A difficult thing to do because at this point, tubes was invented in the 1840s, of course benefited the Impressionists. It was much easier for the Impressionists to paint out of doors. So this is a little oil sketch painted directly from nature out of doors. He wouldn't have exhibited something like this. He would have taken it back to his studio and repainted it with a higher degree of finish. So we can actually see the finished painting, and he's made lots of changes in the composition, and that's what he would have sent to the salon following year. Upstairs on this top floor, we find sketches by Géricault for the Raft of the Musa, and this painting, which I find this incredibly moving and gripping, painting of a mad woman. Now, and there's something Géricault painted. It's thought about 12 of these studies of mad people, of which 6 definitely survive, and 1 is in the Louvre. And they're unique. They're different from any other paintings of mad people or any other portraits, really, in that he himself was suffering from severe mental health issues. And he went to a doctor called Dr. Georget, who was a pioneer of more humane treatment of mental illness and wanted to study it in an objective, scientific way rather than castigating or punishing mental illness. And it's thought that Géricault painted these pictures to help Dr. Georget in his studies. So they are painted both from the point of view of somebody suffering from mental illness and from somebody who's trying to look at mental illness in a sympathetic and objective way. Lots of Delacroix of smaller format. This is a painting of a Jewish wedding that he actually went to a Jewish wedding, went on a trip to Morocco in the 1830s, made lots of detailed notes about what he saw, and he incorporated all this into this picture painting when he got back to Paris. It's a painting of a Jewish wedding. And the other famous Ingres nude, of course, the Baigneuses de Valpasson. And this one, this is a painting that is his last masterpiece. And he was 81 years old when he finished this. And it's really the conclusion of a lifetime's fantasizing about the female nude. Slightly pervy, you might think. It's signed at the bottom. You can't see it here. I'm afraid it's cut off. Ingres Pinxit painted this Aetatis Suae, his age 81, rather shaky handwriting of his signature. And this was a painting notorious for its eroticism. And it was acquired by the man you see, the insert at the top. He was a Turkish prince, Khalil Bey, who built up a collection of erotic paintings. Now, this is an interesting contrast. If you could go from this, which is obviously a little boy in a sweet shop, really, a lot of slightly pervy fantasizing, as I said. This is a painting of great dignity. And again, it's a very unusual painting, if not unique, created under special circumstances. First of all, it's a painting, obviously, of an African woman, but it's painted by a woman, Marie-Guillemine Benoist, not by a man. So I think that there's a very different way in which this nude woman is being looked at. She's looking back at us, isn't she? She's assessing us as she looks at us. She's looking at us quite critically. And there's no sense of coyness. There's no kind of fake eroticism. So it's unusual, both in an extremely dignified representation of an African woman and a dignified representation of a naked woman. We're moving backwards in time. So this is the late 18th century, wonderful piece of bravura painting by Fragonard, one of whose works I showed you earlier. He's the definition of the term painterly. That's somebody who really enjoys the brush, who enjoys the substance of paint. You see the movement of the brush across the surface, incredible liveliness of technique. This is another painting I use very often to represent the Ancien Regime, this period before the revolution. This is an aristocratic lady. Now, if you go to any great museum of the world of Western painting, once you find yourself in the 18th century French room, suddenly everybody is smiling at you. They all have these rather slightly artificial smiles. Kenneth Clark called it the smile of reason. I call it the smirk of reason. It's really quite a smirky, superior kind of smile of an elegant lady at a dinner party. This is stunning painting. This is a big painting by Chardin that he submitted as his diploma piece. When you're accepted into the Royal Academy in France, same in England, the Royal Academy, and as a member of the Academy, you had to offer a representative painting. This is L'Arrêt, the skate, a very, very spectacular piece of painting. It's also painterly in that he's an artist who really knows how to use the brush and the substance of paint to really create. You can almost smell the fish. You have a physical sensation when you look at this painting. And it's also a painting, I think, that has a certain pathos. You could see it as a vanitas, a painting reminding us of the brevity of life and the inevitability of death. But the loveliest, these paintings are, they're of all the paintings I'm showing you today, the two that I really long to steal from the Louvre are both very small. I'm not really recommending this, but they would fit into a shopping bag. And this is a little tiny painting by Chardin of very humble objects. And you think, why is this so poetic? Why is it so beautiful? What magic to create out of a glass of water and a coffee pot and a couple of garlic cloves. Rather more obviously appealing by Chardin, called La Bénédicité, the grace, but still very, it's a painting which of course hovers on the brink of sentimentality. Some people may find it sentimental, but there is a restraint that for me that makes it moving rather than icky, sickly sweet. Another key painting in the history of Western art. This is Antoine Watteau's Embarkation for the Island of Cythera. This was his diploma piece in 1717 when he was accepted into the Academy. Now, you probably know that the French love rules and regulations. They like categorizing anything, whether it's cheeses, wines, whatever. And at the Academy, when you became an academician, you had to go under a certain category: history painter, portraitist, landscapist, still life. But Watteau had in effect invented a new category, and they had to actually give a new name to what he did, which was the Fête Galante. And a Fête Galante is a painting of young lovers in fantasy costumes, theatrical costumes, engaged in amorous discourse in an idealized park landscape. This was a new genre of painting, a new type of painting Watteau invented. And this is his most famous example, the embarkation for or from. There's some debate amongst art historians. The island of Cythera is the island of love. So this is a poetic metaphor for making love. But these young lovers, have they made love and they're now leaving the island of Cythera, or are they about to go there and make love? In fact, you could interpret it either way. You could, the couple in the center, you could see the woman is looking back nostalgically at the couples who are still engaged in love on the right-hand side. That would seem to suggest that it's a departure from the island of Cythera, whereas the figures on the left with little swarms of flying putti above them seem to be on their way to the island of love. Now, over to the other side of the museum, we enter into the Richelieu Pavilion on the Rue de Rivoli, and we go through sculpture courts, sculpture of different periods. You've got Baroque sculpture here. You also go through the state apartments created for the Emperor Louis Napoleon in the 1860s with this incredibly blingy interiors. These interiors, actually after the fall of Louis Napoleon, this became the French finance ministry, and it was used as such until quite recently. The sheer lavishness of it, you think, well, that wouldn't have encouraged very strict economy on the part of the Ministry of Finance. And notice the ottoman in the center. And this was designed to enable ladies to sit down, because the 1860s is the period of the crinoline, these enormous, enormous skirts. You can see the Empress Eugénie in one of these crinoline skirts made for her by the English couturier Charles Worth. And there's a story I love about Eugénie sending a crinoline as a diplomatic gift to the Queen of Tonga. When the Queen of Tonga unwrapped it and pulled it out, she thought, what the hell is that? And she hung it in a palm tree and sat underneath it, which I'm sure was a very practical way of using a crinoline. Now we go up to the top of Richelieu and we find ourselves in the northern schools. This is a painting by Van Eyck. Again, very few, only just over a dozen paintings by Van Eyck have survived, apart from the Ghent altarpiece. And this is one of the most spectacular. And it's the Chancellor Rollin of Burgundy commissioned this in the early 1430s from Jan van Eyck, and he's worshipping the Virgin and being blessed by the Christ child. This is not actually a very big picture. It's a miracle of observation. It's under glass, it has to be, because people feel compelled to go very close to it, to look at the tiny detail in the background. We're looking at a couple of square inches of paint here. I think probably no bigger or even smaller than the image you may have on your screen. Look at all the little people crossing the bridge into the town. This gives you an idea of what a town looked like in Northern Europe in the early 15th century. And his face and his hands, every wrinkle, every crease, lovingly recorded, mapped really, that's a map of a face. Now we leap forward, still in Flanders, but now in the 17th century. And this is the most important surviving masterpiece by Peter Paul Rubens, the greatest Flemish artist of the Baroque period. This is the Marie de Medici cycle. It was the Dowager Queen of France, Marie de Medici, who commissioned this from Rubens to really justify herself. she had been a disastrous regent of France, generally reckoned to be one of the real failures in French history. And she wanted to tell another story of her greatness and her success. So it's probably a good thing that Liz Truss doesn't really have the resources to do something like this, but it would be a bit like Liz Truss commissioning, say, a filmmaker today to make a glorious film of the glorious and triumphal life of a prime minister who managed to crash the economy of her country in a month. Marie de Medici also is considered to be a bit of a disaster. But so these huge paintings, they were Rubens painted. It was his practice to paint modelli. So there were small versions that he would show to either Marie de Medici or her representatives, and they would say yes or no. And if they said yes, the big pictures were painted by his assistants. And then he traveled to Paris with them. And when they were installed in the Luxembourg Palace, he repainted them on the spot. So they're real propaganda pieces. This is Henry IV, who I mentioned earlier, Henry of Navarre, apparently falling in love with a portrait of Marie de Medici, being held up for him by the Mercury and overseen by Juno and Jupiter. According to all accounts, Marie de Medici was actually no oil painting in real life. And he probably got a real shock when they were married by proxy before they met. He probably got quite a shock when he met his new wife. So how to represent that? And Rubens does it by transforming them into gods. So that's Marie de Medici and Henry IV as Juno and Jupiter on a cloud on the right-hand side. But the most famous details, as you go round the Marie de Medici, as I said, the underlayer of paint was largely by an artist called Jacob Jordaens. But you can see evidence of Rubens's brush all over the place, and most famously in these drops of water that I mentioned earlier. Here they are, little touches of the brush that give an extraordinary illusion of a glistening drop of water. So it's still in Flemish 17th century, well, actually in England. This is Rubens's most successful assistant pupil, though he was never really strictly a pupil, because Rubens paid Van Dyck. Van Dyck didn't pay Rubens. Van Dyck, in order to escape from the shadow of Rubens, he came to England, became a royal portraitist in England. We're very lucky to have had him because he painted everybody who was anybody in England in the 1630s, crucial period of English history with the Civil War. And he certainly Charles I was very lucky to have Van Dyck. Charles I, by all accounts, again, was a very unimpressive man. He was very short. He was just over 5 foot, with spindly legs and shy and awkward. But you'd never guess it from this painting by Van Dyck. He looks wonderfully suave and confident and in charge of the situation. Rembrandt, of course, you can't leave out Rembrandt's great collection of Rembrandts. There are a number of music. Rembrandt was a prolific artist. So, of course, there are a number of museums around the world that have wonderful Rembrandts. Rembrandt is giving you the eye here. This is Rembrandt's own eye. I just show you this detail because it's so interesting to see the paint surface, which is like a crust of paint built up with thousands of little touches of rather dense, dry paint. And there are 2 self-portraits by this one is from an early portrait in the 1630s, this one from towards the end of his career, but that very moving, rather melancholy quality that his late portraits have. People always saying, I don't know how you can really define this, but people say Rembrandt doesn't just paint the physical likeness, he actually paints the soul of the person. It seems to paint beyond the surface appearance. Here is the detail of that. And something that is unique is this. There's nothing else quite like it by Rembrandt, although it's been very much imitated since, the flayed ox. And I'm thinking back a little bit to the Chardin skate, because there is something shocking and moving about this flayed ox. Should it be for vegetarians or not vegetarians, really? The brutality of eating meat, and also this idea of vanitas. In the end, we're all just material substance. And my final picture and my final desire to thieve is this little tiny painting by Vermeer. There are actually two Vermeers in the Louvre, but this is the really famous one, the lace maker, really only inches in diameter, full of light. And again, I'd like to make actually a comparison with Chardin from a very, why is this painting so magical? Why is it so moving? Why is it so poetic? Something very simple, an ordinary girl making lace, and it is utter magic. You do find people standing in front of it. Again, it's high up, top of the building, and it's quite a journey to get there. So you won't find it mobbed like the Mona Lisa, and you are quite likely to be able to have it to yourself. And this is where I'm going to bring my very rushed and partial view of the Louvre to an end.